You are listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. Thank you for downloading and subscribing. Coming to you virtually live from high atop the historic Raleigh building in beautiful downtown Raleigh. The NCF&B takes the listener behind the scenes to tell the stories of the people that contribute to the creation of the food and beverage community of North Carolina. And now, over-imbibing and abundantly indulging for journalistic integrity, it's Max Trujillo and Matthew Weiss.
Hello, and thank you for listening and watching the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. I am your co-host, Max Trujillo.
And I am your co-host, Matthew Weiss. And yes, we are in beautiful downtown Raleigh, and so we're going to lean into that today. And here to give us all the insight, all the behind the scenes of what is happening right here in our backyard in downtown Raleigh is the president and CEO of the Downtown Raleigh Alliance, Mr. Bill King.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you in studio. That's one improvement for downtown is our studio space, right?
So right here in downtown. That's right.
I love it. I love it. It's great having you here.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we are a food and beverage podcast, and we typically talk about food and beverage. I don't know, Bill, first off, you ever work in the food and beverage industry?
I worked in the retail industry quite a bit. So I worked at malls growing up and all through my teenage and college years, did not work in restaurants. So I did retail until I went to get a, office job back after college.
Are you a good folder?
I can do all of that. I can work a register.
Okay.
I can deal with a tough customer. I can do all those great things. I can tell you where to go to get out of the store. So that's always helpful when you realize.
Instructions. So it's not like an IKEA, then I assume is where you work.
Oh, no. It was not. It was not. So
they don't let you leave in IKEA. They're like,
they even have food. They even have food at IKEA now, right?
But if you're like, where's the exit? They're like, no.
You have to walk all the way around through the store to get to the exit. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
But anyhow, so we are talking downtown Raleigh. We're talking Raleigh. We're talking growth. There's been a recent proposal, a plan, if you will. Felicia Trujillo, I happen to be married to her, but she sits on the board for the Downtown Raleigh Alliance, of which you are the president. Well, let's talk about, for one, what is the Downtown Raleigh Alliance?
So we're a nonprofit, and we are devoted to enhancing the vitality of downtown for everyone. And so we work on a lot of different things. We do economic development. And so particularly for food and beverage, that means we do a lot of marketing promotions. We do restaurant week. We do advertising, PR, things like that to sort of improve downtown Raleigh's image, get people down here. We also do recruitment. So we've helped recruit a lot of restaurants and bars as well as retailers. So we try to recruit storefront businesses. We do safety. So we have the safety ambassadors. We also do private security as well here in the core of downtown. So we try to make sure it's a good, safe environment for everybody to come to. We do events. So we do Live After 5, the Christmas tree lighting, Illuminate, Jazz in the Square. We do First Friday as well. And what we try to do with those is get people into downtown, usually on nights where there's not other stuff going on, but trying to drive more traffic downtown, particularly into spaces and times when there might not be as much. That's why we do Live After 5 on Wednesdays, not Saturdays. And then we also do a lot of communications. We have social media, trying to get the word about what's going on downtown. And we do a lot of advocacy. So we work a lot with trying to get things, approved or passed with city council that would benefit downtown. So Sip and Stroll District, the social district, we worked really hard on that for 2 years to get that, sort of set up, get that through. So that's obviously where you can buy a drink from a downtown business and walk around on the sidewalk and sometimes even go into events, things like that with that drink. So it's been a great success. So
what could go wrong?
That's right.
How is the DRA funded?
So we're public-private. Part of our funding comes from property taxes in downtown. So there's a special assessment. This happens in most every downtown in North Carolina and across the country. Special assessment on properties that goes into a fund that then pays for part of our organization. We do events where we have some fundraising from event fees, and then we do sponsorships as well. So we're public-private, which is nice because there's some things we can do that don't require public money, so it's easier to do them. So it's a lot more flexible. We're able to sort of stretch our buck a little bit more. But then we also do receive those funds as well from properties here.
What's the geographical boundaries of the Downtown Raleigh Alliance?
So roughly speaking, on the south, MLK Boulevard. On the east, roughly Bloodworth Street. On the north, we now include Person Street, so that strip. Seaboard Station, the Northwest Street corridor with like Laird Croissant up that way. and on the west, St. Mary's Street, roughly our boundary.
That's a pretty good sized imprint. So like the new Seaboard Station area that's going to come in, that's considered downtown.
Yeah. And does that include like where Smoky Hollow is and down Glenwood?
Absolutely. Definitely. Absolutely does. So yeah, we worked on, for example, grocery store recruitment for the Publix there at Smoky Hollow. We've worked with those businesses. We're doing an October 1st Friday event at Smoky Hollow as well. So it'll be Halloween themed for that first Friday. So yeah, Smoky Hollow, absolutely a part of it.
How do you guys play with the city council and how you work together or not?
So we work with the city council all the time. Usually it's us trying to advance some sort of policy or an investment in downtown. And so the Sip and Stroll District was a good example of where, that was enabled by state law. And so then we worked to do all of the research on, okay, how could we set it up? We did all the stakeholder engagement with residents and businesses on, do you want this? If you do, what would it look like? When should the hours be? What should the rules be? Where should it be? And so we basically brought them the proposal, and then the council sort of debated it, asked us questions, asked some follow-up, and then ultimately determined what they wanted to do with it. And, in situations like that, we don't necessarily get everything we've asked for, but we try to get as much as we can to represent our stakeholders. So we work a lot on that type of sort of advocacy and engagement so that they can make the best policy decision for downtown. We've called for a big investment on revitalizing Fayetteville Street and the sort of downtown core. A lot of that is investment around the streetscape, how the trees look, how the tree wells look, the trash cans, the sidewalk design, all of that. So we've sort of teed up the plan for them that ultimately they've got to determine to invest in.
Okay, this is a good place to jump in. And I know there's bigger hanging fish to fry that we want to get to, but
that's
as far as,
but yeah, sure.
What is the makeup? Like how much full-time staff do you have on the DRA?
Yeah, so we've got, I believe we have 12 full-time staff on our team.
That's a pretty big team.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. We have 12 full-timers, and then we've got the safety ambassadors. We've got 16 of those.
Okay.
And then we also hire private security as well. And usually with private security, we've got at least 3 guards going.
And then you have a volunteer board as well, which
we have a volunteer
Felicia
board.
sits on. Cool.
Yeah. Right. This is the cultural center of this capital of this state. So it's important that this is our first foot forward, right? When the public looks at this state, if you really dial it in, you look at Raleigh and you look at downtown. So this is our first date, our first impression.
I know, but I would argue, and sorry if this is offensive, but I look at people from, New York, my former home, or friends that we had in California, and they think of North Carolina, and the first city a lot of them think about is Charlotte.
Oh, how dare you say that?
I mean, you Bill's offended. He's going to walk out the next day.
That's it. Yeah.
It's over. No, well, here, let's dive in there, right? Like, okay, Fayetteville, we've been talking about this a long time on the show because it just seems like from where I'm sitting, it feels like a little bit of a disaster. There's a couple of restaurants ancillary that, yes, are doing well or doing okay. I haven't looked at their finances, but from my perception of the whole thing. But, you walk down Fayetteville and it's not like a thriving metropolis here, to be nice. So when you're talking about the dry, you're coming into it first from an aesthetic perspective. Let's clean it up and let's make it look nice.
Yeah, so really the plan actually hits it from all different angles. So cleaning it up and making it look nice is a part of making it easier for businesses to be on it. Because right now it doesn't have a great business mix. It definitely, even compared to Wilmington Street or Blunt Street, if you think of some of the restaurants that you think of with Raleigh, they tend to be on those streets. They're not on this street.
Right.
And so some of that is, okay, we need to have it be a nicer experience, better for outdoor dining. In particular, if you think about some of the great streets, if you were walking Fayetteville Street and you had nice lighting, you had a lot of tables out on the sidewalk and it was vibrant, it would feel totally different, right? So that's a key to sort of reactivating it. So the physical part is part of what will make it easier for businesses to actually want to locate on it and do it. So that's a part of it. Our plan also talks about tenanting. And what it talks about is in general, from the public art downtown to the tenants we bring in to how we talk about ourselves, we should be celebrating the fact that we are the best of North Carolina. We're the capital of North Carolina.
Yep.
Which is one of the things that no other city can take. I think a lot of cities in the Sun Belt have kind of used the same playbook, which is, okay, let's get some craft breweries and some James Beard Award restaurants and dog parks and stuff. And that's the Austin, Nashville, Atlanta, Charlotte, all of these cities, we kind of have used some of that playbook, right? So you think about what makes us distinct. Part of what makes us distinct is our greenway system, and our park system is incredible.
Yeah.
And then part of what makes us distinct is we could be a celebration of North Carolina, that as much as Charlotte is, the bigger city, it's not known as sort of this kind of, melting pot of the state. It's just, it's Charlotte.
Yeah, big business banking.
Right. All of that, which is great. So we should be celebrating that. So whether that's not only in how we do public art and events, but even in how we tenant, we should be targeting sort of a best of North Carolina kind of tenanting strategy. And you already see elements of that when you think about Burial, coming from Asheville a few years ago. Burial is one of the best breweries in Asheville. It's great to have them here. You look at some of the restaurants we're able to bring, even on Fayetteville Street, Flavor Hills comes from Jacksonville, North Carolina. That's a wonderful Black-owned business that's doing really well. So it's another opportunity for us. So that's part of it too, is you should come into downtown and feel this sort of North Carolina experience, not only in, okay, yeah, we'll have the flags up and all of that, but in, okay, I feel like I'm getting a flavor of the culture of this place.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do.
So with that, and Matt and I, we could speak pretty well to this, being that we have been doing the show for 8 years. This is the 494th episode that we've done.
Who's counting?
Who's counting? And with that said, I mean, the lion's share of our episodes have come from triangle-based businesses, just given where we're at. And there's not a lot of new business opening up in Raleigh, in downtown. Post-pandemic, post-George Floyd, whatever you want to say, the violence that happened out here, we had boards on all the windows, and it was like, what are we going to even do in this place? And a lot of business has left. But we had a thriving food and beverage community in this area. And we know that what a thriving food and beverage community does to the rest of the community is it brings people in, and it brings more business, and it brings more residents, and it brings more tourism. And the bottom line is it raises revenues for everybody. But we're not seeing a lot of that right now. Now, there are a lot of spaces on this street and in the local area that are open and vacant and ready to go. I don't see a lot of encouragement in growing that space. I'd love to see more, because those towns like the aforementioned Denver or Austin, they're both thriving with bustling business, and there's an entry to get in that seems like the bar was a little lower or easier to acquire. And to all the business owners we know out here, they're like, I'd love to come to downtown. It's just too damn expensive, and there's just not really an infrastructure there at this moment.
So I think that is changing a lot, and even on Fayetteville Street. So if you look at what Highwoods Properties is doing, so Highwoods and Empire own a lot of spaces on Fayetteville Street in the core. And if you look at what Highwoods is doing with their spaces, they're about to open Birdie's, which is LM Restaurants, up here in the 150 block. They've got also Primo Hoagies going in there, Insomnia Cookies, Diced Salads. They brought in Cheeto Taco on the southern end, and Sir Walter's second location. So you're about to see, that's 6 new concepts coming that'll all open in the next year or less, which is great. Some of them will be open by the end of the year.
That is great.
And which is good. And so what you're seeing there is what they've done is essentially kind of restructure how they do deals to make it happen, right? Okay, let's figure out a way to get you in.
Who has? The city council?
The landlord.
The landlord.
The landlord has,
Well, because the narrative of this building across where Primo's and where Tasty Eats was once, and that's where Dice is moving in, I've inquired about that for many people, being a consultant in businesses, and they were not renting out to anyone for 4 or 5 years because the thought was they were going to demo those areas and rebuild. And then out of nowhere, I see people coming in. I'm like, well, wait a minute. So what was the deal? Did the deal just not go through with the demo? So they're like, well, shit, we got these buildings. We might as well rent them out.
Yeah. So the deck and that building, what's people call the Wells Fargo Tower, were owned out by a group out of Atlanta.
Yeah.
That group owned it until 2021, sold it to Highwoods. That group was going to build an office tower on that deck. So yes, for years they just sat on it because they're like, well, we're going to tear this all down, so why would we lease it out? And then, as things have changed, the thing that has really changed since the pandemic is the office market, right? Yeah. And so that's a lot of what we're dealing with, is the fallout of that. We measure everything. We have all this cell phone data. So I can tell you, residents, visitors, and office workers every day in downtown. We have more people living downtown than we did 4 years ago by a pretty good number, and a lot more moving in. We've now gotten back basically to where we were on visitors. June actually was better than it was 4 years ago. So June of this year was better than June of 5 years ago, 2019, which is great. Office workers are where there's still the big gap, right? And that's true all over the country. It is better than it was a year ago, better than it was 2 years ago, not particularly close to where it was 4 or 5 years ago, right? And so that is affecting this core of downtown, because this is not where there's a lot of residential. There's some, but the body of residential is really coming on the west side. So Glenwood South is a good example of, Glenwood South has been at its pre-pandemic food and beverage sales since March of 2021. March of 2021, vaccines were just becoming widely available.
Right.
But what that shows you is it wasn't dependent on office workers. It was mostly dependent on young people, right? And it was nightlife and F&B heavy. So it recovered really fast. And so its sales are still way above its pre-pandemic levels. This side of downtown was heavy on office worker and to some degree visitor. So we've recovered visitor, which is where a lot of our, sort of recovery's been, but office worker's been slow to get back because people are just hybrid. So, if you come downtown on a Friday morning, it's pretty quiet because a lot of people work from home on Fridays.
Real quick, for our listeners, because I know that some people are probably like, when are they going to talk about this one? We're going to talk about Red Hat in a moment. Just hang tight because there's still a couple more bites off this bone that we want to get into.
Well, let me ask one last question and then let's get into that.
Yeah.
So from where that office worker problem, I don't see it getting any better. I mean, why would we go back to working? I would maybe at some point a little bit here and there, but we've pretty much discovered that we're as effective working remotely as we are in the office. And maybe there are some people that need to come in or need to be more hybrid, but I don't see those numbers increasingly. Is that in the plan?
No, I think what you're really seeing is, in the short term, what you're looking at is trying to get more visitors and residents in. Right. So we're building a lot of residential. We've built 4,000 units in the last 4 years.
Okay.
Which is great. So that's going to add a lot more people living downtown. And then some of what we talk about in the plan in terms of making our streets more comfortable, more interesting, more vibrant. That's how you get more visitors in. Right. So leaning into those two things, because office workers, what we found is that's really a relationship with the labor market and your employer. If your employer values you being in the office, you'll be there. If you don't like that, you'll get a different job. Yeah. Right. And so to some degree, reckoning with that has been a part of what's going on here. But just to finish the thought, what you are seeing in this area is you are seeing some landlords do deals differently to get people in. And they understand, hey, if the ground floor is really good, if I got good restaurants, good bars, good retail, the upstairs will fill. And I think that is true. And you're seeing that. And we see that in other parts of downtown too. So that is changing in this part of downtown, which makes me really optimistic. And I do think even if we do this talk 6 months from now, you'll be talking about a little bit different vibe here.
You mentioned safety, and then there's basically no inner transportation. So if you're having a cocktail up in Dram and Draft up by, the very top of Glenwood, and then you want to say, let's go to Foundation, you got to either call an Uber, take a long walk, or, have it.
There is a free bus municipality that happens out here, but that also might be part of the problem too.
I don't even know about it.
And the buses that we have here are free. You can just get on a bus and go wherever you want for no cost. The other thing is we had scooters everywhere that showed up, birds showed up in the middle of the night one time and everybody freaked out because they didn't ask anyone.
Drunk people on scooters though.
But you're talking about transportation and those things happened and then they weren't executed properly. There's been a huge fight against, just like a social fight against scooters in the area. Everybody hates people on scooters. It's not been handled well. I think if the city embraced it and focused on it and said, this is how we're going to handle our public transportation, if there were scooter lanes with the bike lanes and maybe be more intentional about it, I think that would really help bring the community together because like you mentioned earlier, we were talking about the public, what is the
sip and
stroll community. I mean, it feels like that's a step in the direction of hey, let's bring this community together. The problem is it's we still don't have a street that feels very safe to walk on from time to time. I work here, but I realize as I'm walking to my car in one of these parking structures, if it's in the middle of the day, I'm getting eyeballed by 14, 15 people in large groups at all times. And I'm this feels so uncomfortable. And it does feel like that's part of why we don't see a lot of foot traffic and why we don't see a lot of people coming in here. It feels like there's a lot of loitering in the area. And I'm from a pretty big city. Matt's from New York. I'm from LA. You really don't get bigger than those two spaces. And in Culver City, we had a really bad gang problem until they enacted a no loitering situation. You couldn't be in groups of larger than 3 for any longer period of time. And any groups sitting on a corner just had to be disbanded immediately for the fact that you're not doing any service to the community by grouping up. And theirs was more gang related. I don't think of this as gangs, but I look at it more it just feels intimidating at times. There's got to be a plan for this.
Well, I think we've made good progress there. We're not all the way, right? So I think if you look at where we were a year ago, summer of 2023, we were seeing really big groups, right? Yeah. Large groups of teenagers, all of that, particularly around the bus station area, and in the plazas and all of that. that has gone down significantly. And if you look at crime data, our crime is down 22% in downtown. Violent crime is way down. Burglaries are down like 40%, all of that. So you look at all the data, it's gotten a lot better. And even the size of those groups have gotten a lot smaller, which is good. I think that there's still work to be done there. The bus station is a tricky situation. Bus fares are about to turn back on. So the bus will no longer be free. It'll now have fares. That may have an impact on teenagers. Yeah. I think there's some degree to which that behavior is because there's a central location that they could all get to easily for free. That may or may not affect that. That's a complicated social issue, right, of how we sort of handle that. But I think you'll see an impact there. That's why we brought in the private security to put those eyes, particularly here in the core. And then that's also why we have to keep doing some of the other stuff too, which is, we've got all the security and all the eyes on it, but you got to create safety in numbers too. And so there is a bit of a chicken and egg to that. Yeah. But adding more restaurants, adding more things to do, adding more events, it creates a comfort level where people start coming back down here. On the longer term, adding more housing in the core would help a lot because if you have more people living down here, those are people walking their dog every night, all of that. There's a lot of reasons why you don't see as much of this issue in certain parts of downtown, but some of that is there's just so many people living in some other parts of downtown that there's sort of a natural, vibrancy to it that we got to add more of in this part of downtown.
Going back to your original career in the retail industry, it's funny. Matt and I, we've talked about it on the show before, and I think the beauty of Raleigh in general and even just North Carolina is like we don't do a lot of big business, and I think we take pride in that. Like you don't see an Olive Garden right here on the corner, and you don't see a Gap right next door to it. But I'm almost kind of jonesing for something in that larger scale to exist because I think if we had a foundational, what is it called? A
foot traffic generator.
Well,
like an anchor.
An anchor. Thank you. That's what I meant to say. Having an anchor store. You put in a Zara downtown. Mm-hmm. Every lady, including myself, I bought some nice clothes while I was in. Zara's nice. Yeah. But you put a Zara in here. You put in, a Banana Republic or something. Mm-hmm. My question is, are we ever getting those questions? Are we fielding any of those offers from big companies, and what happens there?
Yeah, so our group does a lot of recruitment, and I used to be the recruiter when I first got here 10 years ago. So I helped recruit, Publix and Weaver Street. I was a part of, a lot of recruitment of different stores. I do think we've evolved a little bit here as a community. We would have that discussion of, hey, we need some, known anchors so people will come down here.
Yeah.
I think downtown is so intensely local. I mean, our retail is 90% locally owned in downtown, which is great in a lot of ways. But it would sometimes create a tension if any sort of chain or anything was greeted as, a big threat, right? I do think our retailers have evolved to a place, particularly post-pandemic, of, hey, obviously we don't want to get pushed out of here and nobody wants to push them out. But gosh, it would be good to have some more, mix because then that's how consumers realize,
it was nice having the CVS down here so I could just buy a bottle of water, toilet paper, Tylenol.
Right.
But now, unfortunately, like the places that exist, like the Dollar X, whatever it is, there's a lot of crime going on over there. A lot. Like somebody just got shot just not that long ago. And then you got Taz, and that is like like the mecca of loitering.
Yeah.
Like in that one space. And at least this CVS that was down here below was, I don't know, it was clean, well lit, and it seemed like a pretty decent place to go. I was surprised that CVS left and decided to go somewhere else, but I think they were just, I don't know. It's a big tell.
Well, I think to get to your question, the challenge we've got now is post-pandemic. A lot of the folks who were looking around pre-pandemic are not necessarily anymore, and it's not a Raleigh issue. It's a national one.
Yeah.
So CVS and, Walgreens, for example, have kind of gone back to drive-through model because people during the pandemic got used to getting their prescriptions drive-through.
Yep.
They didn't want to go in the stores, and now they expect that. And so you're seeing that happen. So we don't have as many nationals looking around right now. And so, pre-pandemic, you were seeing a lot more of the sort of Anthropology, those type of stores, which are great for driving that type of traffic. We do have Urban Outfitters in the warehouse district. So that was an example of one who signed on, but we don't have as many. To make those happen, the deal has to be pretty aggressively in favor of the tenant as well. So you have to have a landlord who's willing to make a pretty ugly deal to make that happen. So
let's get ugly. Let's get super ugly.
Finish the button on the transportation, though. Mm-hmm. Okay, first of all, and sorry, this sounds so naive, but is there an app for the bus that you would go on?
Yeah. So you can track that, and the R line still exists, which the R line is what you're referring to. It goes, from Glenwood South into the core. That is changing. The city's putting a fee on it. They never had one before. It was free. It now will have a fee on it. So it'll be like any other bus. So we'll see how it does with that. I do think that there is still missing a bit of an east-west connection. So some of what you see is Union Station area, all of that. There's a bus that does that, but it's not very well known. So I think there's still work to be done there. And part of the plan that we released, this economic development strategy, talks about creating more comfortable streets so you can go east to west. A lot of what we hear from people is the Dawson-McDowell divide is what stops them. If you're in the warehouse district, coming, this direction, you kind of get to Dawson and you're like, this is intense. This is not a great street to cross, or vice versa. And so, we have in there a fairly provocative rendering of making those streets look a lot more comfortable, because those are basically mini highways running through downtown. And so they don't feel safe. You're not going to walk your kid across that street without feeling like it's really unfortunate.
All right. So now we're about halfway through this. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about the Red Hat Amphitheater and the expansion of the Raleigh Convention Center. I believe those two things go hand in hand. As I am to understand it, the Convention Center is going to expand itself where the current space is for the Red Hat Amphitheater, and the proposed idea was to just move the Red Hat Amphitheater one block south, thus making it kind of a space for all of it. The idea is that it's going to expand. And that much, I believe, is happening no matter what, right? The convention center is happening.
Correct. That is happening no matter what.
Okay, so
it'll happen.
The question is, what do we do with the Red Hat Amphitheater, and what is on the table at this point?
So you're right. So the convention center needs to expand to the site of the current amphitheater. It was built that way. The tunnels are already underneath it. All the infrastructure is there. Convention center will happen no matter what, right? And once that happens as well, we'll get the Omni Hotel. And so the Omni is building a hotel, 550-room hotel at the end of Fayetteville Street, which is really great. We don't have anything of that caliber.
With everything, right?
It'll help bring a lot more people to downtown. It brings us a whole new type of hotel, which is great, a whole new size convention, which is also helpful. Conventions here, Sunday through Thursday, a lot of what fills the restaurants downtown are convention, goers.
Right.
A lot of people, in Raleigh are busy, homework, kids, school, all that. We certainly get people downtown on weeknights, but that's what fills in the restaurants a lot until the weekend, which is great. So we need that expansion. So that'll happen. The amphitheater then would move just south of there and be built basically where South Street is between Dawson and McDowell. So the challenge is that in order to do this, you have to close that block of South Street. And so that's where some of the controversies come in. That is the thing that council has to vote on, is closing that street. If they do not close that street, then it's very likely the amphitheater does not happen. And the city's exhausted all options. So they've looked at other sites that they own, other privately owned sites, putting it in different places. This is where it has to go in order for it to be the size that it is, to attract the tours that we have, to be as successful it is. Because this year, it's got 51 shows in it, which is great. And so already they've sold over 260,000 tickets to this season, and we're still not even done. So that's a lot of people coming downtown.
Last year brought in $17.5 million, which is not nothing, but
half the shows.
Right, and with half the shows. So we're looking at, and just following the money again, Red Hat Amphitheater is funded, or it's owned by the city.
Correct. The city owns it.
The city owns it.
Yep.
And that revenue goes into the tourism bucket?
Yeah. So, revenue from it, goes back into the fund that pays for all this stuff. So Convention Center and the amphitheater and the PNC Arena, all of that. So there is also an element of, if you don't build the amphitheater, you've got a problem with a fund that funds all these other things.
Right. So then that fund gets slashed, jobs get cut, and revenue gets lost. What is the biggest argument for closing South Street, the South Street, like that block? What would be the biggest effect for the community? Why are people challenging it?
I think a loss of connectivity there. So, immediately west of it, you have Heritage Park and you've got Boylan Heights. And so I think there's some concern that we've heard from, residents, particularly in Boylan Heights, around, okay, well, if we lose this block, what does that mean for our access? Are we being cut off from downtown? Are we being sort of walled off? So I think the concern is access, right? I haven't really heard anyone be anti-amphitheater. I think that's not a fair characterization. I think everybody likes the amphitheater. They see what it does for downtown. They like having the shows. That's that loss of connectivity. What does that mean? I think a lot of people wonder, can we do it differently? Could we put it somewhere else? Is there a way not to do that? And look, losing a street, a block is not ideal, right? But if you look at the plan, what they would do is they would take Lenore Street, make it look a lot nicer. Lenore is fine, but it's not particularly nice. So you'd add bike lanes, much wider sidewalks, which would be great.
Right.
And then the other thing the city's looking at is essentially restoring the car connectivity between Dawson and McDowell south of the new amphitheater. So they'd essentially build a little street in between the two and connect it so that you could still drive. You just would be a little bit further south of where you are now. So most of the access, or a substantial amount of the access, would still be there. It would just be on Lenore Street and then on this new connector.
This seems like a no-brainer. I don't even understand why this is even an issue.
I think some of it is, for some of the community, I think it felt like it came up quickly. And so I think just wrestling with the pace of this. And, the reality is we're trying to move fast here because this is all connected. The amphitheater needs to move so we don't lose a season. So it's got to start construction this winter.
But we're used to the community not being consulted on problems. Kamala Harris is our new Democratic candidate.
God. Here we go. Matt feels very left out that he wasn't included in the vice presidential nomination.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't,
She
and
was
neither was
verified at
the
the
rest
DNC.
of the community. But anyhow, people have to do things. The answer to that question was, well, we had to act fast. Nancy Pelosi herself said this.
Yes.
And so we had to go. We couldn't wait. We couldn't waste time. I would say there's a parallel here. If you let this dime hold up a dollar, meaning a block of street, to expand everything that the downtown area severely needs, you're going to miss on everything. So
you're agreeing.
well, I'm just saying that was the narrative of how sometimes people don't get their voice heard, and sometimes it's for the greater good, right? So if you believe in that, Matthew, then you should believe in that for anyone that's complaining about South Street one block to close down for that moment.
Well, I mean, from what I'm hearing from this one perspective, I haven't canvassed those people who are trying to access South Street, but as you yourself said, it seems like a no-brainer in this scenario, especially when they say, I mean, it's happening regardless. They're breaking down the convention center, that part, and they're going to dismantle Red Hat Amphitheater as it happens now. So,
right. So, I think there are opportunities to have their voice heard. There's a city council hearing a couple weeks ago where we had a lot of people come and speak. There's a public hearing on this issue September 17th. So that's an opportunity as well for people to speak on it.
September 17th. Folks.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So,
And we're dropping this episode this week, so this is going to be in a timely fashion. This
perfect.
will be out on the 5th of Thursday. So so you got a couple weeks now if you're listening to
12
this.
days.
Well, and people can also sign up for the September 10th council meeting, which is actually the best one to sign up for because that's where there's the most opportunity to speak. Public hearings are very constrained. There's only 8 minutes per side. But on a public comment, you could speak for up to 3 minutes and they can have a bunch of people speak. So sign up for that.
Let's go, bro.
It still reminds me of Game of Thrones, where they sit up on the Iron Throne and all like the common folk get to come in and be like, he stole my sheep off my land,
Yes. Well, you can bring up your sheep. I might have to go there and start talking. Well, okay, so let's bring this back to, because this is the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast, and friend of the show, friend of me personally, Adam Eckert, who owns Crank Arm. He's been public about this. You've also got Ashley Christensen with Pools Diner right there. She's one of our biggest and brightest chefs in the area. Closing this area, remodeling this area, even if all things go according to plan, it's going to shut down this business for some time, right? Like Red Hat's going to be not Red Hat while it's being built. And I know how long it took for me to build a stupid restaurant in Nightdale. That was a year of my life I'll never get back. So how long would it take to do it if everything went right?
Well, that's part of why there's so much urgency, which is if we delay it, we will really cost ourselves. Right now, the idea is that if this passes, basically this starts moving, and sometimes this winter, they would start essentially the construction, right? With the idea that at the end of the 2025 season, the current Red Hat Amphitheater would close. So it would go for another season. And then as soon as that amphitheater closes, they start dismantling it and start building the convention center. And by spring of 2026, the new amphitheater would be ready to open.
Okay.
So we wouldn't miss a season.
We wouldn't see it.
Yeah,
Okay. So
that's
any
right.
of those businesses that were worried about the hiccup of their business, the Red Hat Theater, there is a season. It's not open year round. So you're not going to get that business anyhow. So it's happening in the dark of night, essentially, while they're not active.
Right. I think looking at that timing, we might miss some ice rink that one winter because, the ice rink is there. I'm not certain of that. They may be able to still accommodate that.
You
But,
could put that anywhere.
but-
I mean, there's one in Fenton. You can put it anywhere.
but I think that's part of the urgency is, the council could delay this just to have more time with it, but there's no other alternative. And all it would do is cost us shows at the amphitheater, which hurts the businesses. Because what I've heard, I talked to Adam a lot, and all these businesses, we've done a lot of advocacy on this, right? So we've spent a lot of time, had a lot of meetings. Overwhelmingly, they tell us this is a huge impact to their sales. And
Sure it
so if
is.
they were to lose this, it would be really detrimental. So that's why we can't really afford to lose a season to sort of sit on it more, right? And
Yeah.
so we've gone through the alternatives. They are what they are. This is what it takes to keep this downtown. Let's keep moving.
Yeah, because Max, you mentioned 17.5 million. That's the direct revenue from the Red Hat
Yeah.
Theater. That doesn't
not-
that doesn't talk about all that the
whole-
restaurants are
yeah.
making, the parking garages, the bars that people are drinking before and after, and everything else. And even if there's retail and they're shopping for that, that doesn't talk about that, which I have to imagine is pretty significant boon to downtown Raleigh businesses.
Yeah, you consistently hear them talk about it in terms of, hey, it's like if you took a Saturday night of sales and put it on a Tuesday night if the show's on a Tuesday night
Yeah.
for us. And that is super meaningful to them. So it would be detrimental. You think about all those businesses near it, the Berkeley, Crank Arm, Whiskey Kitchen, Parkside.
Yeah.
But even what's been interesting is talking to businesses several blocks away. Businesses on Fayetteville Street are like, hey, look, here's my sales on a night with a show and here's without. Huge difference, right? And so it's not just there, but we've got businesses on Hargett and Martin telling us, actually, this is a huge deal for us. Over on Morgan Street, they're telling us it's a big
sure.
deal. So it's got a really wide impact. The other thing it does is getting back to where we talked about earlier on safety. There's the things we can do like the private security and more police, and there's the things we need of safety in numbers, right? Bringing things that get people down here, because it's just hard to have somebody in every single corner if nobody else is around, right? And make it feel good. This is a part of that. When I walk out of my office building at 6 o'clock in the evening, I can immediately tell if there's a show just looking at how many people are on the sidewalk. It's instantaneous. I can go, oh, there's somebody playing at the amphitheater.
So it also brings in more people, more firepower, more influencers, more everything. And it becomes relevant. It's not this mid-level city that we've always kind of endeared ourselves with of what Raleigh is. It can actually possibly grow up to be a city like Austin or a Denver or something like that. And I think that's what this city deserves.
Yeah, that brings an interesting question. We were looking at the stats before, and it says that the new amphitheater, if things go as planned, would only add 1,000 seats to it.
Yeah, it would go
Max
from
and I
like
were looking at-
6,000 to 7,000
Max-
roughly.
Yeah, Max and I are looking at each other like, why would you go to all that effort? Like, if you're going to build it and you're trying to bring more business, and arguably it's a significant revenue generator for the community, why wouldn't you like triple the size and make it a 15,000 or at least a 10,000 seat amphitheater?
Well, I think, some of that is, I think they'd make it a little bigger if they could. That some of that's a site constraint. I think some of that is how tours are sort of routed and the kind of tiers they're in. You get much bigger than that. Now you're getting into the Walnut Creek amphitheater zone, which we've got that, right? And so that's a 20,000 seater, obviously in Southeast Raleigh. And so to some degree, there's not a lot in the in-between there that is needed to justify that. What I know that the city did hear loud and clear from tours was, don't make it any smaller. We're not going to come if you make it smaller. You need to
But
make it
they're
this size.
categorical sizes of
Yes.
venues. Like you got the comedy club is a 300 seater, and then you've got the live stage like the Lincoln or so, and then what's the Ballet Mamande Center, and that's a few hundred. It might not even be 1,000 in that space, but it's like it incrementally gets up, and then that's how people book, because they're like, okay, I've got this many people. This is what I do. The Red Hat Amphitheater, I guess, is like in that sweet spot, but it
is.
could probably be 10,000 if because that would help generate a little bit more revenue.
Well, and
would think.
what's interesting is it's in sort of a group of similar sized venues, right? So Charlotte, Wilmington, Richmond is building one, Nashville, all of the same size amphitheater. And so if you watch tours, they all go through these, the same week. They play
Same
the
track.
same string of amphitheaters. But the other thing is, the city heard is, hey, if you don't build this at this size, we're just going to skip you. So, there
Right,
was some
you're
talk
out.
early on of, okay, well, let's not close the street. Let's just build it as a 3,500 seater or something, and we'll get both, right? And, the tours were very clear of like, no, make it smaller and we're out. We're going to go to Charlotte, we'll go to Wilmington, we'll go to Richmond, and we'll move on. Or another city will build it, right? And that would be the fear too.
What's the talk about the Dix Amphitheater potential? Is that
Dorothea Dix Park.
Dorothea Dix, where if anyone's gone to Dreamville, that's where it's been hosted the last few years. The idea from what I read was that there was an idea of building an outdoor amphitheater. Probably, at least from the schematic, it reminds me of the Cocoa Booth Amphitheater in Cary, where it's outdoors, but it would be roughly the same size. It would be about 6,000 to 7,000 people in an area that's walking distance from the Red Hat Amphitheater. And also, sorry, Boylan, community, would it be right in your backyard, even probably closer than what it is? So what is that? Is that happening? Is that just up in the air? Where are we at?
I was on that master plan committee. I think there was some ambiguity left by the plan of essentially the consultants said, hey, here's where you could put one. You could do a venue here, but didn't really decide, does this replace Red Hat? Is it complementary? What does that look like? I think this process the last month or so has been clarifying, because to me, where Red Hat is, what it does that no other venue does, because it's in downtown, you get so much food and beverage sales off of it in terms of people going to restaurants and bars before and after. You think about the rest of the region, a lot of our venues, Coca Booth, Walnut Creek, PNC Arena, Wake Met Soccer Park, are not surrounded by restaurants and bars. So we leave a lot of impact.
Destination spot.
Right.
People come in and out, and that's it.
But they tailgate. Well, that's great, but you don't have that same impact. When you have it downtown, you do. I think what we found is, what we're hearing more and more of is what would go at Dix Park is not meant to compete with this. It would be more of the symphony, theater, jazz, acoustic type for part of what you described, which is there'd be a real noise issue coming out of Dix Park if it was that. I mean, we had Mastodon playing at Red Hat a few weeks ago. I don't think that show's going to work, up on the plateau.
You're not going to get any louder than Mastodon.
No, up on the plateau there at Dix Park.
That bass player's sick, by the way.
So I think what is emerging from this is more of, okay, something that would go at Dix Park is more likely going to be those type of theater, symphony, jazz, acoustic type, probably a little bit smaller. So that's more of a version that competes with like the art museums, maybe a bigger version of that, and not competing with this. So I think we're getting to a place where that's going to make more sense. But yeah, there was definitely some ambiguity before.
When you were talking about the tours coming through there and saying they would, from what I read, it was mostly Live Nation is the one that's driving that. Why are we locked in or beholden to one booking portion of the tour? Is that just a venue-based thing? I mean, I know nothing about these, but I thought like the PNC Arena has their own booking person and they talk to various bookers or agents.
Yeah, the way that it works in the music business, and there's probably people listening who could explain this better, but there is essentially, a handful of promoters who have the vast majority of tours, and they route them, and they've got these contracts of all these venues, so it's very easy. So when you're in, you're in. And so like we're in the same grouping with Nashville and Wilmington and all these others. So that's why these tours just keep flowing through, which is great. When you're out, now you're kind of on your own cutting these one-off deals. You don't get anywhere close to the number of shows. And when we've talked to the convention center who controls the amphitheater, they're very clear on what you'd get is far fewer shows, because there's a lot of shows that are in that group, right? And Live Nation, for better or worse, is one of the handful of promoters who have them. Not dissimilar to what you see in Durham with DPAC, right? DPAC has all the Broadway shows. So they all go there. We don't get those shows anymore, which is part of what we've been trying to explain to people of we don't want to make that mistake again. Raleigh used to get those shows. We lost them. They built that Performing Arts Center, which has been great for them, not great for us.
And that's where they were at the Mamonde Center, right? That's where those Broadway shows came from.
Memorial Auditorium, yep. And then the deal fell apart, so they built that building, and that's it, right? And so that's just the reality is they get Hamilton, and we're still waiting, right? We don't want to have that situation. So unfortunately, for better or worse, that's what you end up with is there are a handful of national promoters who have a lot of the tours, and when you're in with them, it makes it a lot easier. So that's why we have 51 shows this year. If we didn't, I think you'd see something closer to what you have at the Art Museum, which is a wonderful facility, but they're not doing 51 shows this year.
Yeah.
The other thing is they don't need to, right? That's not their main revenue driver. At PNC Arena, same deal. They're focused on the 45 Hurricanes games they get each year.
Yeah.
And then the
but they
20
are
state
also
games.
seeing a good amount of like comedian come through there and some good big artists.
And we know
Justin
firsthand.
Timberlake was there. So
Right.
But we know firsthand because we've had Steve Gorman, the head of the food and beverage of PNC.
Yeah.
He's there. They're looking to generate revenue as much as any business.
Yeah.
They're not like, oh, we're good. No, they're looking to get creative and make things
Every
happen.
night they fill those seats, there's more people buying from their concessions.
Yeah.
There's more people spending
And
money on
as he
tickets.
said to me directly, I'm as concerned as a 10-top walking in as I am for the entire Adam Sandler audience that comes in.
I don't know how much you weigh in on this, but there's been I see a lot because I'm into baseball, about a baseball team coming to downtown Raleigh, a major league team.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that and also, which I would have thought, seeing how Raleigh supports the Canes. Now, I know that's not downtown Raleigh, but also I thought we were having a good chance of getting an MLS team here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the little inner workings and what we're trying to do with those things?
Yeah, so I was involved to some degree with the MLS bid. We really wanted it downtown. Huge soccer fan. I thought it would be perfect. So we worked closely. Back in 2017, the MLS came to town. They did a tour of all the expansion potential cities. They went to Charlotte the day before. They came here. We had a great event at City Market, showed really well. That back then the stadium plan was supposed to be on the state government campus on the northern end of downtown. That was extremely complicated and ambitious. So then it moved to downtown south, which is a lot easier to pull off.
Okay.
Privately owned. There was a movement back about 5 years ago to get some financing for it. Never really took off, never quite got there. I think, honestly, the biggest challenge for that bid was, like any professional sports bid, you need billionaires wanting to do this, right?
Yeah.
And MLS's interest skyrocketed. You saw the success of the Atlanta team, which does 40,000 plus a game. And suddenly there were people really interested in getting this. So Charlotte's bid, for example, went from being not competitive, and we talked to MLS folks, didn't sound like they had a great visit then, but then they got a billionaire involved.
David Tepper.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they have a team today.
And they have a stadium.
And Nashville, similarly, Nashville was not considered ahead of us in 2017. Got an ownership group together that wanted to do it, put together a stadium deal. They have a team. And so, those things happen where it was a big priority for those places, and then they got very wealthy people involved. I think that was a little bit of a challenge here. And so those folks sort of jumped ahead. That doesn't mean that it's dead by any means, but certainly that sort of window seemed to sort of pass for now. But we'd love to see that happen eventually.
It just seems so fitting, with the rise of soccer, the size of the stadiums you need, because you don't need exactly a football stadium to bring in to make successful MLS. And you just, like I said, the way that Raleigh supports the Canes, it would seem to be a no-brainer if we can do it. But his name is escaping me, whoever owns the Hurricanes, wasn't he involved in that as well?
The Hurricanes owners involved to some degree the Major League Baseball proposal. Steve Malik owns the soccer team, who's been great. And again, I don't know that that's dead. It's just, probably going to take longer to happen.
Yeah.
But it could happen. North Carolina's growth is such that it's not inconceivable that you could have two teams.
Sure.
Right. And so I think that could absolutely happen. On the Major League Baseball side, I know there's definitely a pretty strong movement to try to become a serious expansion target. I think we would be great for that. I think that one does have some involvement from the Hurricanes owner.
Okay.
Which I suspect complicates a little bit of the location. I mean, the Hurricanes are located over there and they're sort of trying to build this giant, sort of sports entertainment complex. I don't know the degree to which whether baseball would go there or not, but we would love to have it downtown. I'm a huge baseball fan. I'm a big believer that baseball belongs in downtowns. I think baseball should be played with the skyline, viewed out of the outfield. It's kind of a gateway experience. I grew up in a Major League Baseball city. It was one of my big sort of go downtown experiences, right?
Yeah, you're a Braves fan. We'll forgive you.
Right. But even living in DC, I mean, that was a great experience going to
might be worse
to National Stadium. I'm not a Nationals fan.
Yeah, no.
But having it in an urban area, I think is important. So we would certainly love for it to happen. I've been optimistic about how strong the sort of movement is to get a team. I don't know exactly where it would locate, and it still was going to take some time to figure all that out.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more like a team that plays the Savannah Bananas out here. That would generate.
Come to Raleigh Springs. They do. They play the Salamanders in the summer.
Because that's a riot. I haven't been to a game yet, but
it's crazy how they've blown up over the last couple of years. Yeah.
I have very close friends that are obsessed with it, and they can't stop talking about how amazing it is. But I will say, to the point that you're saying, Matt, I think we're getting there when it comes to, as you said, Bill, we basically just need a lot more rich people to come into this town,
but to it's say not it very like we don't have directly. It.
Well, a recent TBJ article that just came out was talking about get ready, here come the billionaires. We are building infrastructural residences into this area that would accommodate those folks, like homes that are starting at 5 million plus that are being built all around the area. And that is to anticipate all of the big business coming out of RTP and the tech industry. And Bill's nodding his head, yes. So yes, this is all happening. So the money is coming.
Yeah.
And so I think we just have to be patient on this. And it's not dead. It's just, we need deeper pockets in this town.
Yeah.
And hopefully, this is what I would say is, when those deeper pockets come in, those are the ones that need to be able to fund the food and beverage industry for all these specialty projects. I know some big development companies have reached out to me, and I've put people in touch with people that have built restaurants since. And a lot of these buildings that have happened and a lot of these restaurants that exist today were all opened off of just huge real estate money that they're like, I don't even give a shit if this makes money or not. I just want a restaurant here. What do you say? It's going to cost you $2 million? Done. And they do it. They're like, here's a 10-year lease. Go. These businesses don't care. They just want an amenity like the way a hotel would do it. Working in amenities or working in hotels, they don't care if there's profit there. They just want to have it so that the execs get to like wine and dine at the end.
Yeah.
We just need more of that, even though it's not like almost like essentially great for the restaurant community. It's like we don't care if you live or die. We just need you to live. We just need more of those so that it could actually foster a larger community. And then the more authentic restaurants can like dip in and build and grow the whole thing naturally.
Yeah. I'm a big swing kind of guy. I mean, yes, that's great, but you need a lot of those to build up versus imagine you get a baseball team or a soccer team, and that's a 40,000 on a small scale stadium bringing in, we're talking about Red Hat bringing in.
But no, I'm saying you need those other guys to
get
then
the
build
money to people
the
in
business
it.
around. You need the infrastructure to build within it, because you could have a cool stadium in South Raleigh, but if there's no restaurants and there's no community around it, like it's not going to support the actual baseball stadium.
Yeah, but I think if you built it, the rest would come automatically because it's a no-brainer.
The Durham Bulls are in the center of Durham.
Yeah.
And you have Durham has been built properly, and there are restaurants all in that area that feed off of the success of those businesses. The sports and events, but those events also get fed because they have the restaurants around there to support them. It's chicken and the egg, but it does work out well because they've done it in a very dense area. And that seems like that's the proposal that Raleigh wants to do. They want to make all this stuff tight. You don't want to push it out to the outskirts because, like you just said, it's not going to support.
No, then you're Atlanta. I mean, to take your point, you look at, I don't know if you've been to the Braves,
any of those
Stadium.
It's all like.
I mean, well, you can argue that the Dodger Stadium is kind of part of LA.
Yeah. Well, they brought SoFi into right next to LAX. Like that would have been in my backyard when I was living in Playa del Rey, because it was in Inglewood, which is like right there. It was right there.
But no, but those big cities don't need it in the town, right? And actually, they probably don't want it. Like living in New York City forever, there's a huge spot to build on the Hudson River on the west side, and Manhattanites were like, I don't freaking want that. That's going to cause more traffic. It's going to be. I'd rather take the bus to East Rutherford in New Jersey.
And how are those New Jersey Giants going to do this year?
Not good. But the point is, in Atlanta, their stadium, Truist Park, is out in the suburbs, and it's a whole little village unto itself, and it's supporting each other, but it's not Atlanta, so versus Raleigh could really benefit from something like that.
And that gets us back to, that's what the amphitheater does.
Yeah, for sure.
The amphitheater has that impact where I don't know if I've ever eaten at the amphitheater, but I always eat before or after a show at the amphitheater somewhere nearby, right?
Yeah.
So it works out really well. So that's the model we want for any future venue is, hey, do that. Support this, existing ecosystem.
Yeah. All right. So as we get out of here, let's think about, let's drill it in. Everyone pay attention. I know you've been zoning out because we're talking sports. Now we're talking back to the very, very most important meat and potatoes of this whole episode, talking about the growth of downtown Raleigh as a core. So what do we need to know immediately? It is Thursday, September 5th. You're listening to this right now. Where do we need to go? What do we need to do to champion for the growth of Red Hat Amphitheater, for the expansion of the Convention Center, and to lift up the food and beverage industry of the downtown Raleigh area?
So I think, in the very near term, if you're supportive, hey, sign up for City Council to speak on September 10th. That's a great opportunity to sort of voice doing all of this, making these investments, keeping the amphitheater downtown, keeping things moving.
Where do you do that?
So you just go to, if you go to keeparamphitheater.com, we show you how to sign up on there. So go to that website, and that'll tell you how to do it. Also, save Red Hat Amphitheater social media directs to that. So easy to find that. It's a little hard to navigate, but we walk you through the steps there. So take a look at that. And then, longer term, we got to support more investment in downtown, particularly making our streets more comfortable, our public spaces more comfortable and interesting. We have some nice plazas and parks and stuff, but they're pretty underwhelming relative to what they could be.
Yeah.
We make those more interesting. We'll get more people down here. It'll support our food and beverage industry, I think, in a really meaningful way. So that's important. And the final thing is, for our landlords and those who have property, I do think you're seeing more creativity on deals, which is why we're starting to see more businesses come in. But supporting that as well is really important, and continue to support these businesses. We got a lot of local independent businesses downtown who need people to come and show up and support them. They can't exist without customers. So we need people to show. If you want them to stay, you got to come and have dinner, have some drinks and hang out.
Can I say one of the funniest things that our downtown community has done, and I don't know who the genius was that did this, but in the anticipation of the IBMA, the Bluegrass Festival,
Yeah. IBMA.
somebody blasted bluegrass music in that breezeway right next to St. Roch as you're going into the parking lot or the bus center. They put it at level 11, like the speakers were blowing out and like smashing so hard. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind listening to bluegrass, but when you crank it, guess who doesn't like listening to bluegrass? Teenagers and the loiterers that typically hang out in that area, in that space. When the music was blasted at full volume, guess who was not there? I'm like, it was totally intentional. There's no way that was done by accident, but it was like, this is a spot that tends to have a lot of people just hanging around, milling around, not doing anything. Let's blast music that no one likes right here. Good job, everybody. Good job. We need more of that obnoxious. It's kind of like what we do with like Guantanamo Bay by playing Mastodon at full volume.
Yeah.
So, bringing it back. Anyhow, I'm gonna go there. Let's go to the city council meetings. Let's make this happen. What do you think?
Yeah, so I will say for everybody out there, go to
keeparamphitheater.com or save Red Hat Amphitheater on social media.
those sites and come down to Raleigh to eat and drink. You will eat and drink extremely merrily.
Thank you for listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. By rating us online, you're helping others to discover our show. Follow us on all platforms at NCF&B Pod.